Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Illinois Green Party series. I am your host, David Rich, with my co-host, Kelvin Tomaszko. Kelvin, how are you?
Hey, doing great. Happy to be here.
Great. We have a very, very special guest tonight, the most recent presidential candidate for the Green Party, Mr. Howie Hawkins. Howie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks you for coming on. I know you're extremely busy, even outside campaigning. I know that I hear from all the Green Party members that know you and anything about you, you have an extremely filled schedule. So thank you for taking time out to talk to us here in Illinois.
No problem.
All right. So I want to start off. I'm just going to go big or go home, they say. I know you have an extremely interesting history that what I would love to talk about at some point, but I want to get into the issues right away because I know that you have an impeccable talent for knowing the nuances of a lot of these things. You're well trained and well learned in these areas. Let's go right to climate change. Okay. And I know that in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change put out a report saying that if we started then, we could reduce, I think it was by 35% a year or something like that, whatever the number was. Basically, as of right now, we need to reduce carbon emissions globally by 45% by 2030. It gives us about, whatever it is, 8.5 years, right? There's even a 6.5 year urgency, according to some scientists. A lot of people are very skeptical that that's even going to happen because it's global. Because even if America does it and Europe does it, there might be some stubborn countries like, no, too bad, we don't buy it, we're not doing it. Why don't you go ahead and discuss the whole notion of climate change and the absolute urgency involved in it right now?
Sure. Well, first of all, 45% in 10 years globally requires the United States to do its share.
Right.
And the Biden climate plan, which was in his American Jobs Plan, came nowhere close to that. And I spent 10,000 words taking that plan apart. It's on my campaign website at howiehawkins.us. And I think the title was Why Biden's Climate Pledge is a Promise He Cannot Keep. Because about 3 or 4 weeks after he released his American Jobs Plan, he had that climate summit with people from around the world. And he promised that the U.S. would reduce its carbon emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. Now, first of all, flags went up when he said 50 to 52% and didn't show his homework. He just pulled that out of the air or someplace even dirtier.
We get it.
So, even with his full plan, none of them related to how much a particular investment would reduce carbon emissions. It's really not a plan. I mean, I can give you a couple of examples. First of all, he puts a lot of money, relatively, the biggest portion of the money in that plan, into basically swapping out internal combustion for electric cars. But no transition of the transportation system from dependence on personal vehicles and trucks for freight shipping, which means you're going to build this massive fleet of electric vehicles where you need lithium and cobalt and copper and a whole lot of other rare earth minerals and other minerals, which requires massive extraction, often from countries that are poor and can't even get good deals from the global corporations that will come in and do that. They'll end up polluted. It's not sustainable. And, he said we're going to build 500,000 public charging stations over 10 years or over 8 years.
Oh.
But you look at the studies, if you're going to do that, you need 8 million public charging stations. And if you want to get to net zero by 2050, which is, what they say, you basically have to get rid of internal combustion engines by 2035. Like the states of California and Massachusetts have pledged, GM has pledged, and that's sort of the date that you figure you can get to zero emissions by 2050. By that time, almost all the internal combustion engines would have worn out. But he's nowhere close to that. And then he brags or boasts in the joint, the working group that, the Sanders and Biden people did, they pledged, I think it came out in the American Jobs Plan, what was it? I think it was 2 million homes would be retrofitted over 8 years. Where there are 120 million buildings in the U.S. And I did the math. At the rate they're going, it'll take 480 years.
Oh,
So, in the building sector, they're not serious. They had nothing on agriculture, nothing on manufacturing that's high carbon like cement and steel, where you need new technologies. So it's a joke. And then the economics are very conservative. I think Biden got his number based on what he thought he could get from a corporate tax. He's not getting that. I don't know what Sanders is coming up with in that reconciliation package. We still don't have the details for it. It comes to $3.5 billion over 10 years. 3.5 trillion. Yeah, 3.5 trillion, which is 350 billion a year. Now, my campaign, and I worked with a political economist named John Wren, who used to be the research assistant for Seymour Melman, who was the foremost industrial engineer, who used to figure out how to do peace conversion back in the 60s and 70s, post World War II, and then how to maintain our industrial infrastructure as the trade agreements were coming in and the corporations were moving our manufacturing offshore. And so John was, the expert I worked with, and we budgeted out how to transform every sector, relying on the numbers we have. And we came to just to transform the energy system in all sectors, not just power production, but manufacturing, agriculture, buildings, and transportation. We came to 27.5 trillion over 10 years. And we show our homework. And I have to tell you, there's nobody else has a plan like that. The closest is Robert Poland. He is kind of the economist who has put forward the case for the Thrive agenda, which is what the coalition of the more liberal environmental groups are pushing. And what they're pushing is basically do what Biden said he would do on a larger scale. And the difference between our approach and their approach is they are basically, it's Keynesianism. We're going to subsidize corporations with tax breaks and subsidies and give them a whole lot of contracts. So we're putting the same corporations that got us into this mess, the automobile companies, the oil companies, and so forth, in charge of making this transition. Now, the first thing you have to understand is take steel. If you want to transition from coke ovens, which release a lot of carbon, to electric arc furnaces, which the industry is doing slowly. If you're a company looking for private profits, you're not going to get rid of your coke ovens until you wear them out and they got to be scrapped. Right. So they're not going to move fast enough. So instead of handing over to corporations in the markets where their investments will not be coordinated with each other. So what we do in public transportation doesn't link to what we might do with public housing. So we can create more resource and energy efficient walkable communities. We're saying we need to greatly expand the public sector like we did during World War II. The federal government took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime into what they call the arsenal of democracy, to arm the allies against the Axis powers. We need to do nothing less in this climate emergency. So our eco-socialist Green New Deal calls for public ownership in the energy sector, the key manufacturing sectors, and transportation sector. And then a lot of public housing, so we can deal with the housing crisis and find affordable housing for everybody, but do it in coordination with building mass transit, so that we can design walkable communities, which we got to do to have a sustainable society. So that's why we need social ownership and economic planning to get this job done in the timescale we're talking about. And I was the first candidate to call for a Green New Deal in 2010, running for governor of New York. And it was both a response to the economic crisis. In fact, we led with that. We're coming out of the Great Recession, and the climate crisis. And, our Green New Deal, beside the 27.5 trillion for transforming the economy so it's powered by clean energy, we have 14.1 trillion for an economic bill of rights, a job guarantee, guaranteed income above poverty, affordable housing guarantee, Medicare for all, quality, lifelong public education from preschool through public college, and secure retirement. So Social Security benefits would be, we said, doubled. So that's the kind of Green New Deal we need. And it needs to be eco-socialist, not just corporate welfare. That's basically what these Keynesian programs are. Poland's research and projections, say we invest this much in this industry and we'll get X number of jobs. And he's more into the jobs than the carbon reduction. In any case, that's basically leaving the system intact. And, the slogan that the eco-socialists say is system change, not climate change. So that's what we put forward. That was our leading issue in the campaign. And, it's a shame I didn't get to debate these two fools that were running from the major parties. Biden was running away from the Green New Deal, and Trump, he was saying, climate change is a hoax.
Yep.
So, and so we're in dire straits right now because we're not getting a climate plan from this administration. Biden is not stopping new fossil fuel infrastructure, Enbridge Line 3, Enbridge Line 5, the Dakota Access Pipeline. Everything he's done is to help those go forward, which locks us into decades more fossil fuel burning, including Bakken fracked oil and Alberta tar sands oil, which are climate bombs. So that's where we're at.
Thank you.
That is too bad that couldn't be on that debate stage. I mean, the Green Party was being removed, I'd say almost illegally, from many ballots across the nation, and it would have been just amazing to have that voice that's actually the people's voice, the concerns about climate change, the concerns about more stability and better planning. That would have been amazing.
Yeah, the illegal removal of us from ballots. I don't know what other electoral democracy that's credible in the world has the two governing parties administering their own elections.
So that's crazy.
Most other countries have an independent, nonpartisan election commission. Canada does, the UK does, Germany does, just about everybody does. The only country I know that's moving that way but haven't got there is Ireland. They've been fighting over legislation on that for 8 years, but they're headed that way. So here, in the 3 cases where we lost the ballot line, every vote on our status at the Secretary of State, Board of Election level, and in the courts was partisan. Republicans voted for us, Democrats voted against us. The facts and the law be damned. And the facts and the law were on our side. But in Pennsylvania and Montana, Democrats had the majority. And in Wisconsin, I wish I knew what went on in the back rooms of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, because the Republicans and Democrats hate each other. I mean, it literally come to blows. But they got one Republican to flip over and give the Democrats. And they said, you're too late. Even though they sat on our case for a week and brought it up to near the deadline for mailing the absentee ballots, and then blamed us. So, they're all hacks. And, you can't have those people running elections. People are all up in arms about the Republicans. There's voter suppression. Then there's voter subversion. I mean, it's going on in Georgia right now. They are removing Democratic, particularly Black Democratic, County Board of Election people under this new law. And they're going to bring the certification of elections into the Republican-controlled legislature where they can flip the election subversion. But what a lot of people don't see is that the Democrats do the same thing. Party suppression is a form of voter suppression. 61% of Jill Stein's voters in 2016, we know from the exit polls, would not have voted if she wasn't on the ballot. The Green Party brings new voters out more than it takes voters from other candidates. So that's what the Democrats do. That's what authoritarian regimes do. They decide who gets to run, or they'll knock them off the ballot, like Putin's political machine did in the Moscow elections in 2019. They used ballot petitions to, said, your signatures weren't right, didn't have the right address, all that stuff they do to us. They might have learned it from the Democrats over here. So anyway, that is a huge problem. We should be demanding independent, nonpartisan election administration, like every other credible democracy in the world. Because right now, the Republicans are doing it brazenly, but the Democrats do it too. if you've ever had a ballot petition challenged, the hacks come out. There's some people that just live for that time of year when they can knock third-party candidates off the ballot. In fact, they enjoy it so much they knock each other off the ballot here in court.
Well, here in Illinois, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party actually came together and fought to make it so that ballot access would be almost fair for at least one election cycle, due to COVID being able to get a lower number of signatures, the same amount as the establishment party.
It was 10%. So like for the third party, because I was actually a libertarian at the time, it was, let's say you needed 12,000 signatures for a third party candidate. They sued the state and got it down to 10%, which was, of course, 1,200, which was still very, very difficult to do. I couldn't do. I was running as a libertarian candidate. I got like 112.
Yeah, and it's disappointing that way. But one thing that some people are looking towards is ranked choice voting. There's a group, Fair Vote Illinois, that I'm a part of that's pushing for ranked choice voting. And then there's, of course, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and some others that are interested in ranked choice voting. I think the Yang's group, that I can't remember the name of it. We may have interviewed somebody, David, if you can help me. But
the Yang Gang? That's what
no, not the Yang Gang, not the oh geez. We interviewed them like 2 weeks ago, but now I can't remember the name of that group that's also focusing on ranked choice voting. Anywho, ranked choice voting would be great because it would make elections, come out with the majority support candidate winning rather than a plurality, which means not necessarily the majority. It could be something as small as 20%. And it makes elections less fearful. You can vote your heart and not be afraid of a split the vote effect. I wanted your thoughts on ranked choice voting, but then I also wanted your thoughts on, is ranked choice voting enough, or does ranked choice voting need to have something that addresses ballot access at the same time?
Well, I think you can do it with separate legislation. There has not been a good bill in Congress for fair ballot access since John Conyers introduced one in 1989 and reintroduced it in the next two sessions of Congress and then dropped it. And you can find that. I've put the link to it in several articles I've written recently. I think the Greens need to shop around and find a member of Congress who at least get it on introduced so we have something to campaign around. And the numbers of signatures need to be radically reduced. I know in Illinois, in most of your congressional districts, you got to get over 15,000 signatures to run as an independent or new party candidate for the House of Representatives. If you want to run as an independent for the House of Commons in the UK, you need 10 signatures. Mm-hmm. You need 10 signatures for
10.
The Parliament. The whole you need 2 signatures in New Zealand, 50 in Australia, 100 in Canada. Unless you're one of those northern rural districts, they lower it to 50. I mean, I can only dig this up in English. I found a German site that I could translate. For them, it's 200. In this country, it's thousands or tens of thousands of signatures. Yeah. We're off the charts.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of legislation. And then as far as ranked choice voting goes, yeah, what you described solves the spoiler problem when you're electing people for single member seats, which executive offices are inherently. So we want it for that. What I'm concerned is the new movement for ranked choice voting is not calling for proportional representation through ranked choice voting for multi-member districts for legislative bodies. From the Green point of view, if we still have single member district winner take all, it doesn't matter whether it's plurality voting or ranked choice. And I'll give you an example from the Green Party in Australia. In 2019, countrywide, they have single seat ranked choice voting for their House of Representatives, but multi-seat ranked choice voting and proportional representation for their Senate. On the House side, the Greens got 10.4% of the first round votes nationwide, but they only got one of 151 seats. There was one district where they, basically had a majority. Wow. On the Senate, on the other hand, they got 10.2% of all the first ranked choices, and they ended up with 9 of 76 senators, which is actually 11.8%, but it's closer to proportional. And that you can go back to 2016. The votes were very similar. The number of Greens got elected for the House and the Senate were exactly the same. So there you have a case where in the legislative bodies, having ranked choice voting for single member districts with winner take all really doesn't change anything. And without proportional representation, we're excluded. You know, it depends on the state. You know, a quarter to a third of the voters in most states are not affiliated with the two major parties. Many are in minor parties, many are small I independent. They get no representation. In a winner-take-all election, whoever wins that given district gets all the representation. And every other political viewpoint, including the other major party, their supporters, get nothing. They're excluded from the legislative bodies. Most countries in the world are now using proportional representation, have for a long time. And United States, and even those that still do plurality voting, like England, Canada, are moving toward proportional systems and ranked choice systems. So, you know, in England, for example, they still elect the House of Commons by single member district plurality, but the assemblies in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are elected by multi-member ranked choice voting, so they get proportional representation. They used ranked choice voting for the London mayoral elections. So they're moving. We're moving on single member ranked choice voting in this country. The irony is, in the early 20th century, the progressive movement got, they call it also the single transferable vote. They got multi-member RCV for city councils in 24 cities. And the result was a multiracial, multi-party democracy. For example, New York City, before they went that way, and they had 5 elections between 1937 and 1945, 25 members of the council were Democrats. Afterwards, the Democrats were still a 60 to 65% majority, but you had 4 or 5 other parties represented. You know, there was the Fusion Party, American Labor Party, Communists elected a couple people the last couple elections. And the Liberals elected somebody. So, you know, they had much more diversity to reflect the actual positions of the people in, excuse me, New York City. And then in, you know, communities like Toledo and Hamilton and Cincinnati and Cleveland and Ohio, ethnic minorities got their first representation. You know, Catholic, Irish people and Polish people and Italian people were electing people, as were African Americans. And actually, because it was successful in creating a multiracial, multi-party democracy, you know, the upper class, the WASPs, mobilized basically a racist campaign against blacks and, you know, Southern and Eastern European and Irish ethnic minorities. And in New York City, it was a big anti-communist crusade after World War II in the McCarthy era, because those 2 communists got elected, American labor people got elected. But when they had proportional representation, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was the first black man elected to the New York City Council, and he ran as a third-party candidate of the American Labor Party. And the first women were elected to the council under that system. So the irony is we used to do that, and it was a growing movement in the progressive era before World War II. And I think we're losing that in a lot of these campaigns in the states, which are just focused on single member ranked choice voting. And I think that's a mistake if we limit ourselves.
Yeah, I remember hearing about STV, and I do like that version quite a bit. I'll have to bring it up with the Fayetteville, Illinois folk. And then I remember the group. I'm so sorry for forgetting the name. It's Humanity First. There's Illinois chapter, Humanity First. Yeah, whoops.
Yeah, I was like, who are you talking about?
But David, take it away. What's your next question?
Well, what I want to, real quick, I want to give a shout out to the couple people who posted on some comments here. Rob D. Rich, this actually ties into what we were talking about. Says, Howie, a Green was elected mayor in Galesburg, Illinois. It's actually Peter Schwartzman, who was our very first guest on this show. what should we expect from a green mayor? And I actually like that question because we talk a lot about international, national, state-wide duties, obligations to deal with these things. What about where the rubber hits the road in the local communities? What do you think?
Well, what we should expect from a green mayor is delivery of public services in a way that benefits the majority of people, the working people, instead of what we usually have. Most cities are run by the real estate industry in those cities. And so, just take city planning. A lot of these have planning agencies, planning commissions, and basically they rubber stamp proposals brought to them by developers. The city itself should be doing the planning and then asking for bids from developers.
There you go.
So, you want to stop sprawl, that's the way to do it. So there's all kinds of things you can do at the local level. In our federalized system, local governments have a lot more power than they do in a lot of countries.
Mm-hmm.
They can tax, they can pass laws, they've got procurement, purchasing things, lots of way of leveraging things. They even can do eminent domain to take over private assets in the public interest, like your municipal, like a power utility. So there's a lot we can do at the green level. And I think the important thing is we got to, be competent and deliver for the people, and also stay in touch with them so they know that we're doing it. In other words, don't just sit there in your office writing memos and making phone calls, but, get out, meet the people, listen to them. I've always found when I've run local and state campaigns, for sure, I always find there are issues that I wasn't thinking were big issues, but are for people. So elected officials got to be in office like, they're running. And I don't mean dialing for dollars. I mean listening to the people and, finding out what kind of help they want.
All right. Thank you. Calvin?
Yeah, that actually goes right into one of the big questions I wanted to ask. And that's, I was listening to your podcast, the Green Socialist podcast you do with Angela Walker. And you mentioned something that kind of blew my mind in its simplicity. And that was the door-to-door priority, which is part of what you were mentioning there. You suggested that Green Party members go door-to-door in their neighborhoods and talk with the people, but also, and more importantly, listen to them and see what it is that their concerns are. What's the concerns of the community at large? And you said this not in the context of like, oh, when you're campaigning, do this, or oh, when you have a petition, do this. You just said, go do it. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about that strategy, because I find it profound, because there's no like, oh, we need something from them. It's more so we want to listen to them. We want to hear them. Could you go into that just a little bit more?
Yeah, if the Green Party is going to beat the Democrats and Republicans, we got to be a mass party, which means we just can't put out Facebook notices and listserv notices about what we're doing. We actually got to go to the people, particularly the people that vote in low numbers, which is mostly working people, people of color, youth, because they don't think voting makes any difference. And in winner take all plurality, single member district system, it doesn't. I mean, you're in a district where one of the other major parties has a majority. You already know who's going to win the election. You can vote all you want. You're not going to change your representation. You can't get your proportional share representation. And a lot of the, people that are called low information voters because they're, working class, low income, they actually see through that better than some of the middle class people who have, I think, illusions about the influence they have because, their elected officials will give them a polite hearing and then do what they're going to do anyway. So those are the people we got to reach. And how do we build trust? Well, first of all, they have to know us. It's a personal thing. It's building relationships.
Yeah.
And if you knock on doors and start preaching to people, they're like, I don't know. Who are you, a Jehovah's Witness? But if you ask them, I'm with the Green Party, and we're talking to people to find out, what's going on and how we can help, deal with any problems. And I've sort of intuitively did that for a long time in my, local runs. And, the advice you get from the campaign managers, no, you don't want to stay long at the door. You just want to find out if they're with you or against you, mark it down so you can mobilize them on election day. But my instinct told me, It's a long haul, and we got to get to know these people, and they need to get to know us. So that's called deep canvassing. In the labor movement, they call it relational organizing. And you go out, instead of preaching, you listen. And after you've heard some things, you can relate what they say to, the green platform. You can even say, well, I don't agree with you on your position on, there's some pretty conservative people out there. We don't have to.
Yeah.
We just have to respect them. And I can tell you, there are a lot of very conservative people in Syracuse. Many of them on the social issues, they're Catholics. They don't agree with me on abortion rights and things like that. But most of them say, Howie, we know where you stand. You're out there all the time. And I'm going to vote for you, even if I don't agree with you on these other issues. That's, I think, what we got to do. So the other thing we got to do is be visible between elections, not just during elections. So when the Greens come forward, the people say, yeah, they're the ones that have been fighting for affordable housing or against the police brutality or for better schools, whatever the issue is in the community. Crime is a big issue in urban communities. And, what's our solution to that? Well, where's the crime concentrated? It's coming out of low-income communities, the property and violent crime disproportionately from there. Well, why? Because people don't have other options. So if you're out there saying, we got to find jobs for the youth, we got to improve the schools. Some of these youth are disconnected from any stable family situation. They need mentors, people they can talk to, support them. If we're known for that, then people in the community say, yeah, the Greens are with the people. They're with the community. So and this has to be year round. We should be systematically going out and going out to the communities that are not necessarily involved with the Greens. It varies from place to place, but typical Greens are pretty well educated people in the caring professions, teachers, nurses, social workers, people like that. But what about, the warehouse workers and the delivery people and the construction people and the people that, clean up, buildings and hospitals and so forth? Nobody's talking to them.
Right.
I mean, the one thing is that the Democrats and Republicans don't talk to them, at least directly. They message at them, but I don't think they can. So I think, that's what the Greens need to do. Do this deep canvassing year round, build your list, build your relationships. And then, I just know, because I've done it for a long time, I would run into people that would tell me about a conversation we had 10 years ago. And I don't even recognize the person, but it was meaningful for them.
Sure.
Yeah. I want to add on there, because you actually blended right into my other question, talking about what can individual Illinois Green members, Green Party members do to connect with the labor movement. And you said you want to talk to them. So are you suggesting stuff like go to join labor strikes and stand with them in solidarity? Are you saying we need to hold our own protests and join protests? Or perhaps you're saying support the formation of worker co-ops. What do you think are the best angles for Illinois Green Party members to join in that labor cause?
Well, where there are labor actions, strikes or pickets, it's good to be there and let the folks who are also active in that action know that you're in solidarity with them. Now, you should always, when you're running candidates, go through the proper channels seeking endorsements. And you may not get them. A lot of them are tied to the Democratic Party, but a lot of them will respect the fact that you asked. And over time, you can build relationships. And we've got endorsements from a lot of unions. But the most important thing is to talk to the rank and file workers, because there's a big disconnect in most unions between the staff and the elected officers and the rank and file. And there's a lot more rank and file than there are staff and officers that can vote for you, among other things. So you need to orient toward those folks. And as far as worker co-ops, I mean, I helped organize one back in the 70s that did, energy audits and retrofits solar and wind installations, what today we call green jobs. There was Carter had a tax break for solar for upscale people, and there was a lot of subsidies for insulation through the Community Action Program. So we built a business around that, which lasted until Reagan pulled those subsidies. And the other members of the co-op didn't want to spend all their time putting fiberglass insulation in trailers and, really low-income housing, because the fun jobs were the solar installations and the energy audits and the retrofits. So it fell apart. But the thing about worker co-ops or consumer co-ops, it's like starting a business. I mean, it takes a lot of time and energy. And so you got to, figure that into your equation. Do you really want to, spend a hell of a lot of time getting a business going as opposed to other things you could be doing? I think, and I actually ended up in Syracuse to working for a nonprofit to organize worker co-ops. I was recovering from a ruptured disc in my back that I did logging. I needed a few years to heal up. And, what I found was most of the people, and they wanted me to, talk to people in low-income communities, most of those folks' mentality was, well, we want to form a nonprofit and get a grant and get paid. They really didn't want to start a business. And I think what you need is like the Montagon Co-op Network did. You need a public bank with an entrepreneurial division that can do the business planning, hire the people to do the job, train them to run it as a co-op, and then turn it over to them. You need a lot more support and infrastructure and financing than I could working for this little nonprofit. So now that's something you can do at the municipal level. Rochester, New York, New York City, Richmond, California. There are a number of cities that have programs, although I think most of them are pretty token. But it could be a major plank. A Green Party candidate can say, we're going to form a municipal development bank, a public bank. And we're going to organize co-ops. And then you got people with the expertise who are getting paid to do it. For the Green Local to do it as volunteers, it may be what you want to do. I mean, I spent a number of years here trying to get a cooperative grocery store on my side of town, which has no grocery store. We're a food desert.
Oh.
And in the same week we opened up, one of the chains opened up in an abandoned grocery store with a lot more subsidies from the state government and the city government. And so we had a tough time. And we actually lasted longer in business than they did.
Oh, nice.
We were open for like 18 months and they closed. We actually still have a lot of things. We built a building. There's a lot of activity going out there, including, food pantry kind of stuff. And we have pop-up restaurants, food for a day. So we're using the building. It's just not a full, ongoing consumer co-op. But that was a lot of effort. And I got kind of pulled into it because I had experience, not just the worker co-ops, but I guess they call them the second wave of co-ops in the early 70s. There was a group in the 30s and in the 70s up in New England. We had the New England People's Co-op, a distributor for these local co-ops, and we have food buying clubs all over the place. And there's, about a dozen food co-ops grew out of that movement that are still operating. Burlington, Vermont, Montpelier, Vermont, Brattleboro, Vermont, a couple in Massachusetts. Maybe it's not a dozen, maybe it's half a dozen, but we did create something that lasted.
That's really
a lot of work.
Oh, I'm sure. I've lived in a couple areas of the country, Scottsdale, Arizona, and Portland, Oregon, where there were grocery store co-ops, and they were fantastic. I loved them. I loved everything about them. So July 24th was the nationwide day for Medicare for All rallies across the country. I guess according to Joy Bunton, there was about 52 cities that actually had rallies involved, including Chicago. And actually, Calvin was at the one in Chicago. Thank you, Calvin, for your service.
Yeah, happy to be there.
Howie, could you speak on Medicare for All as a and if you know anything about like what Biden's proposing? I know he's got this hybrid idea of like, if you like your insurance, great. If you don't, you can join the governments. What do you think maybe the most ideal form of a Medicare for All? Because not all Medicare for All, people think of Medicare for All automatically means socialized, as if the government owns the entire industry, and that simply isn't the case. There's different versions, and I've said this a million times, so I apologize for anybody who's listening to my redundancy. But like, for example, in England, the government does in fact own the medical industry, but like in Canada, the government acts as like one giant insurance company, and everything else, pretty much everything else, is privatized. You just sort of bill the government, and the government pays it. That's they take the money out of the taxes. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. Well, Biden promised a public option, but he hasn't proposed it yet.
Yeah.
I don't think it's coming. He's going to run on infrastructure. He's given up on voting rights, the Equality Act, the PRO Act.
Legalizing marijuana.
$15 minimum wage.
$50 minimum wage.
That's a lot.
Just about everything.
So
I can't stand them.
yeah, that's not happening. But what it is they are proposing in his CARE program, the American Families Act, subsidies for Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. So more subsidies for private health insurance so that more people can buy into it in the market, which has really shrunk because most of those plans are crap. You don't have good coverage unless you pay a lot.
Right.
And if you buy the discount version, you can't afford to use it because you don't have anything covered. So it's not a good system. It's basically subsidies to the current private insurance system.
Yep.
Now, what they call Medicare for All is similar to what they have in Canada. You socialize the insurance, but leave the delivery privatized.
Right.
Or mixed, because we still have some public hospitals and
Sure.
Community health centers.
Sure.
But it's mostly private. And where that's at is the advocates like Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal aren't advocating for it. When Sanders hasn't introduced his Medicare for All bill into this session of Congress, when Jayapal introduced her bill at the news conference, she said, "I'm with Bernie. Let's expand Medicare down to age 60 and expand it to cover hearing and dental and eye care." The other thing with the Jayapal bill is that it opens the door to more privatized management of these of Medicare for All, which we have a big problem now with Medicare. I'm on it, and a lot of things aren't covered. There are copays, so you can buy a Medicare disadvantage plan, as I call them, and find out that the doctors or the eye doctor you had, the physical therapist you had, whatever was in your old network before you retired and got on Medicare is not in the Medicare disadvantage plan. I've had the experience of going to a physical therapist for an injury I had and finding out that if I just had plain old Medicare, they'd have covered it. And he wasn't in the network, wouldn't take the Medicare disadvantage plan I had. I ended up paying them out of my pocket because they're good. And I've seen some, there's a difference in quality between physical therapists. So the Medicare for All, or the Medicare we got, needs to be much improved. HR 676, which was the previous bill in the House before Jayapal watered it down, was from McDermott in the same district in Conyers. And it covered everything, no copays, and not so much privatization. But they've stepped back on that. Now, I actually want to see the delivery socialized, not mandatorily. Somebody, wants to offer cosmetic surgery that you wouldn't cover anyway in a public plan, they should be free to do it. If they want to compete with the public prices in, hip surgery or whatever it is, that's fine. But everything should be covered. And it should be under, we call it a community-controlled national health service or community-based national health service. So what you would do is have each local health district have an elected health board. elected 2/3 by the consumers, the public, and 1/3 by the healthcare workers who bring their expertise. And that way, they'll be responsive to local communities. And then for the larger scale planning, those local boards federate at the state level and then at the national level. And, I'm in Medicare now. I have a payment dispute with them. I think they didn't credit me for a payment I made. I'm having a hell of a time finding anybody that can deal with that. Bureaucracy so far away. You get a phone tree, you get robots, you're talking to robots. Right. You can't find anybody to resolve the problem or even figure out what it is. I'm not sure I'm in their, decision tree. So, that's why for me, and we have a New York health plan that is a single payer plan, socialized insurance, private delivery. And I testified before, their committee hearing on that. You need to have locally elected boards to administer this, particularly in a state like New York, where everybody upstate thinks the whole state is run by New York City, and New York City Sin City, and they're going to screw us upstate. So to get buy-in from upstate, give them a way to have some say in how it's administered in their communities. So I think now there was a bill that Ron Dellins put in and Barbara Lee carried until Obamacare passed. And it provided for this kind of community-controlled national health service. It was called the United States Health Service, named after a Miss Baker, who was one of the first Black physicians in the country. I can't remember her first name off the top of my head. But anyway, used to be we had a debate between three alternatives. There was a Nixon plan, the Republican plan, which became Obamacare. There was the Kennedy plan, which was a Medicare for all kind of plan. And there was the Dellins plan, which was a community-controlled national health service that was largely written or conceived by people that came out of the medical community for human rights, who used to patch up people who got hurt in the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. And they were healthcare workers, and they made a big contribution to that bill. That's where I think we got to go. And we were trying to raise that in our campaign. You can read the proposal on our campaign website, howiehawkins.us. So we would immediately go to Medicare for all, socialized insurance, and then over 10 years, socialize progressively the delivery system.
Okay, very cool. Thank you. Real quick, Kitty Graham, I want to give a shout out there. She posted something. She said, some of the people I've discussed Medicare for all with equated to lower quality care, huge crowded waiting rooms, and burnt out medical staff, etc. Little non-smiley face, sad face there. So obviously that seems to be one of the main criticisms of any sort of Medicare for all or socialized healthcare systems, is that, well, you're going to have to wait forever. Now, just anecdotally, I've known people from England, I know people from Canada, and from all over the country. They all say that, like, for smaller things, like, that can wait, you probably will have to wait. But if it's an emergency, you're going to get in right away, just like anywhere else. And I know that there was a lady from the Canadian healthcare system, I don't recall her name, I apologize, but she actually testified in front of American Congress and let them have it over our healthcare system compared to Canada's. And one of the things was, she's like, you're right, we do have a waiting problem, but we're going to look at it and we're going to fix it. That doesn't mean you throw away the entire system. So to even legitimately criticize other Medicare for all systems that do have a waiting problem doesn't mean that Medicare for all is itself a bad idea or not the better idea. What do you say about that?
Yeah, and we have waiting problems.
So, well, there's that too.
Right. 3 months to get inguinal hernia surgery.
Right.
While I was, losing pay as a truck unloader at UPS.
Yeah.
And that's another problem. That injury, I believe, came from, lifting weights up to 150 pounds for hours on end, and that pressures your lower abdomen, and the company said, well, when did it happen? And, it kind of happened gradually. I mean, I kind of felt funny down there. And then actually I was taking a shower and I stepped out of the shower and it's like something unzipped and my guts were poking out.
Ew.
But it didn't happen when I stepped out of the shower. It happened over years of, overusing it. But anyway, so, I went to the doctors and they took them 3 months to schedule surgery. I mean, I have one doctor that I go to now, he has 5,000 patients.
Yeah.
One of the things that was good in the HR 676, I haven't looked at J. Paul's bill for this. Sanders had it in his bill, was a lot more money devoted to educating more doctors and nurse practitioners and so forth, so that you don't have waiting. Waiting is not a function of who's paying for the service, where it's a private insurance or public insurance.
Right, exactly. They're two totally separate issues.
Doctors you have.
Right.
So that's
or your nursing shortage. Right.
And where you have waiting lines, they've gotten worse in England because since Thatcher, they've underfunded the National Health Service.
Oh, look at that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. And, there's also spikes in like COVID hit. I mean, every hospital was overwhelmed for the most part. So some of that might have to do with fluctuations and just what's going on in the population as well. Okay. Calvin, do you have any?
Yeah, on Medicare for All or universal healthcare, I actually really enjoyed your argument for it being a nationalized healthcare system of some sort from like the local on up. But in order to get this passed, is this a likely method? And that is to get it at a state level first. For ranked choice voting, it was at a city first, and then it passed in Maine and now Alaska. For other things like gay marriage, you saw it pass in a few states. And then it got like that toppling appeal. You could always have that rally cry of like, here's a state that's done it. The stats are in. It's working just fine. What do you think of a state first approach with Medicare for All? And especially as a state like Illinois, where we don't have a really direct democracy option in terms of a ballot proposal. That's just not really something that works with our Illinois Constitution. Should we be helping out at least a portion of our efforts? States that do have direct democracy abilities to get it passed there, and that can be kind of the rally cry. And I'm not saying detract from the national efforts or your state efforts. I'm saying a portion of your efforts.
Yeah, I think if we can get it passed in a state that can actually carry the program through, which means you got to have a certain economy of scale. Illinois is big. New York's a similar situation. We don't have initiative and referendum. We have to go through the state legislature.
Yeah.
And we've had a state assembly that's voted for it many times since the early 1990s. Wow. And they always said, and this is a Democratic majority, they always said, well, you got to give us the Senate and then we'll get it passed. Well, in 2018, they got the Senate. In 2020, they got a supermajority in the Senate. And they've never got it out of committee in the Senate or the Assembly now. And we know the private insurance companies are throwing money at those Democrats. So this is the fourth state where Democrats said, give us the 2 houses and the governorship, and you'll get single payer. Hawaii, California, Vermont, and now New York. So I don't think we can count on the Democrats to do this. But I do think if we can get it passed in the state, people see how well it works.
Right.
It'll set an example nationwide. That's how they got in Canada. I think it was Saskatchewan that first.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then it spread to other provinces, and then they went national.
Yeah, I see Michigan having a good push for it. There's a big group there, and I see California just because it's one of the world's largest economies. So I see it possibly working there if the people can get it pushed onto a ballot and it doesn't get stalled, kind of like the marijuana bill in Nebraska, for example. The courts just knock it down. You see stuff like that happen all the time. Yeah. So just because you get enough signatures, sometimes they'll mark the signatures wrong. Sometimes they'll say it doesn't fit the Constitution. So we'd have to pick a state that really looks like it has a good shot, and then, or maybe 3 states, the top 3 states, and try to help them out maybe 1 week out of every month for our local organizing. Because it's going to be tough to get it both chambers of all the Democrats to get along enough. Not without, forcing in some green candidates to get on stage and debate, and not without, or possibly without, but it'd be easier with ranked choice voting.
Yep.
Yeah. David, did you have any more questions? We're coming up to the last 5
We have
minutes
1,000 more questions for
I know.
Mr. Hawkins, but we got like 6 minutes left here.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? Do you have any, I know it's early, I get that, but do you have any at least vague ambitions of running again for anything?
I've always, except a couple times, run when I was asked. I once wanted to run for mayor of Syracuse. Local Greens wouldn't let me. They said, run for this district seat that I'd almost won, got 48% the time before. And I live in the district. I knew I wouldn't do as well because the Democratic machine would get a lot more votes for their candidate in an area where he wasn't known. And so I said, yeah, I'll probably get 40%, which was, sort of my gut. I worked my butt off and I still got 40%. I think I would have got at least that much running against the mayor. She ended up running for governor in 2018 with a new party called Serve America Movement. And I got more votes than her in the city, the county, and the state. So now I'm telling those Greens, you should have let me run for mayor. And then there was, another time I wanted to run for Congress, and I did convince the Greens. And it was the most high-profile race in that election. And it was a way that, got us a lot of attention. It was worth doing. But every other time I've been asked, including when I ran for president, I had no intentions. I had retired, but I took a job at the post office where I was up there 12 hours a day, making a lot of overtime, 7 days a week. I had 3 days off from the week after the election until into the first week of January. And those 3 days weren't Christmas, Thanksgiving, or New Year's. So I was just making money, and all I had time for was go work, go to the gym, take a shower, eat, go to bed, back to work. Meanwhile, these people are plotting to get me to run. And so, they did convince me. So what I'm saying now is I don't have plans to run. I don't have plans not to run. I would look at that after the midterms. And we have a big job here in New York. The New York Democrats passed the most draconian ballot access law in the country, according to Richard Winger of Ballot Access News, the country's foremost expert on ballot access. And they tripled the number of votes we need to stay on the ballot. They doubled the frequency from every 4 years to every 2 years. We have to meet that standard. They tripled the number of signatures we need to get, 45,000 in a 42-day period. It's the shortest petition collection period of any state. They quintupled the number of signatures we need in half the congressional districts, from 100 to 500, which is the way they knock off statewide, petitions. So we got to raise a couple $100,000 to do that petition, next April. So, and then we got to find candidates. I may get asked again. I don't know. I'm looking for candidates. I don't particularly want to run, but I don't want to run. I'm kind of here to do what I can.
Flip the coin.
I'll write press releases, manage a campaign. I've done those things before too. So
all right.
I'm here to help, but I'm not sure how it's going to work out.
Well, you're a good soul for doing that. And I think that really highlights when people ask others to run for a campaign, and they want good people to run for campaigns, and all the Green Party members want there to be people that they can really celebrate and really be proud to go cast their vote for. I think those of us who are more involved and those of us who are thinking, how can I get involved? If you don't want to run yourself, I think it's really important to offer, how can you help those who are running? Whether it be material conditions, whether it be bake them some banana nut bread with your rotten bananas, or your browning bananas. Like, anything you can do to help out is going to be crucial, especially in these local races. Peter Schwartzman talked about how he was walking door to door for 30 days straight, no days off. And that does a number on people campaigning. It's a stressful job. So I just think you're a great soul, Howie Hawkins, for doing what you do and being willing to run. And I hope your stories show everyone else out there that, when we work together that way, even if you don't run yourself, we can really make some moves. We can actually win some spots too, as evidence of Peter Schwartzman.
Yes, for sure. All right, we're at the end of our hour. Mr. Howie Hawkins, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about all these very important issues. Again, as it usually goes, especially now, I have 8 billion more things to talk about with you. We didn't even get to police reform, okay, which is something very important to me. We didn't get a lot. We talked about sub-labor stuff, but there's a lot more to discuss for sure. So maybe we can have you on again in the future. But again, I know you're a very, very busy person. Thank you again. Is there any last thing you would like to plug? Anything at all? Any websites or anything you'd like to give?
Well, yeah, if people want to find out more about the things I was talking about and other things that I talked about during the campaign, it's howiehawkins.us. That's the campaign website. And coming out of the campaign to continue organizing and promoting the platform that we ran on and built the Green Party, we formed a Green Socialist Organizing Project, which also has written materials. That's greensocialist.net.
Oh, cool.
So, if you want to find out more about what I was talking about, those are probably the two places to start.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Kelvin. Good to see you again, sir.
Good seeing you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on what is this, our 14th edition? 13th edition?
Our 12th recorded edition. Yeah.
Oh, 12th recorded edition of the Illinois Green Party series. Thank you so much for joining us. Till next time, be good, be green.